So I want you to imagine feeding a 20-year-old and a 70-year-old the exact same, let's say an 8-ounce steak.
Okay, an 8-ounce stick, right?
Yeah. And from a macroscopic view, everything looks completely identical. I mean, they both chew, they both digest, and, the protein breaks down into amino acids and enters their respective bloodstreams.
Exactly. The mechanics of eating haven't changed.
Right. But at the cellular level, the outcomes are vastly different. The 20-year-old's body takes those amino acids and just eagerly turns them into new muscle tissue.
Like a sponge.
Like a sponge, exactly. But the 70-year-old's body, however, essentially ignores a massive chunk of that exact same protein. So today, we are solving the physiological mystery of why your muscles suddenly basically go deaf to the food you eat and the movements you make.
And we are pulling the data for this from a massive, and I mean incredibly detailed, systematic review and meta-analysis. It was published in the journal Frontiers in Physiology back in June 2026.
It's a huge paper, right?
Oh, massive. The scale of this research provides a really firm foundation for what we're talking about today. The author synthesized 46 different studies involving, I think it was 1,280 healthy participants.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's about 700 older adults and 580 younger adults. So that kind of statistical power, it allows us to cut through the noise and see what is genuinely happening at the cellular level as human beings age.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to investigate a phenomenon clinically known as anabolic resistance.
Right, anabolic resistance.
We are going to find out if aging muscles truly just, stop responding to biological inputs. We're going to uncover a surprisingly optimistic truth about muscle breakdown, and most importantly, we're going to give you the actionable, science-backed strategies you need to actually command your muscles to maintain their strength over time.
Yeah, because this isn't just about inevitable decline.
No, not at all. This is not a gloomy look at aging. It is an engineering problem, really, and we are going to reverse engineer the solution for you today.
I love that way of framing it, because to understand how to intervene and actually maintain muscle tissue, well, we have to establish the baseline first.
Right. We have to know what we're working with.
Exactly. We need to look at what the body is doing in a post-absorptive state, meaning basically the fasting state when you aren't actively digesting food or exercising.
And the researchers measured this baseline activity using stable isotope tracers, right?
I did, yeah.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the methodology here, this is where scientists basically infuse non-radioactive heavy isotopes, so something like carbon-13, directly into a participant's bloodstream.
Right, which sounds like sci-fi, but it's very standard.
Yeah, and these isotopes, they tag the amino acids, acting almost like microscopic GPS trackers. And then the researchers take actual biopsies of the muscle tissue over time to see how many of those tagged amino acids were successfully incorporated into new muscle fibers.
Yeah, it is the gold standard for measuring protein kinetics. Because, it doesn't just tell us what is floating around in the blood, it tells us what is actually being built.
The end result.
Exactly. And the tracer data in this fasting state reveals that muscle protein synthesis, which is the rate at which new muscle tissue is constructed, it shows a small but statistically significant reduction in older adults compared to younger ones.
So the biological building process has definitively slowed down.
Yes, the baseline is lower.
But hold on, if we look at the other side of the equation, right, the muscle protein breakdown side, the data tells a completely different story.
It really does. I mean, most people just assume that age-related muscle loss, or sarcopenia, happens because our bodies start aggressively cannibalizing their own tissue.
Like the muscle is just melting away.
Right. But across the vast majority of these studies, muscle protein breakdown rates they were completely unaffected by age.
That is so surprising.
Yeah, so the net loss of muscle is not happening because the tissue is suddenly degrading faster. It is happening entirely because it is building slower.
Right. Okay, so to put it in perspective for you listening, it's not that the demolition crew on your body's construction site is working at a faster pace. They're working at the exact same pace they were when you were 20.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
It's the bricklayers who have slowed down. So the building is shrinking over time purely because the builders cannot keep up with the normal everyday wear and tear.
And what's fascinating here is how the mathematics of human metabolism actually play out over time. Skeletal muscle mass is governed by daily net balance.
Right, the difference between synthesis and breakdown.
Exactly. And over a single day, this tiny fractional deficit in baseline synthesis barely even registers. You wouldn't notice it, but you compound that over days and months and years.
Yeah.
Yeah, this seemingly insignificant sluggishness in your cellular bricklayers translates into substantial, highly visible muscle loss. It is the physiological equivalent of a slow leak in a massive reservoir.
Wow. Okay, so if the baseline synthesis is crawling, my immediate thought, as a listener, is just to eat more protein to compensate. Does the data support that kind of brute force nutritional approach?
Well, you'd hope it would be that simple.
Right, just eat more steak.
Yeah, but looking at the postprandial state, so the fed state, the analysis shows older adults experience a severely attenuated muscle-building response to protein supplementation.
So it doesn't work as well.
Exactly. This is the absolute core of anabolic resistance. The aging body fundamentally resists the nutritional signal to grow.
But it's not a complete refusal, is it? I mean, the paper highlights specific threshold differences that I think are super important.
Oh, absolutely. The thresholds shift completely.
Because younger adults, they hit their maximum muscle synthesis plateau at around 0.24 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight in a single sitting.
Right, and if you give them more than that, their muscle synthesis doesn't increase. The excess is just oxidized for energy or excreted.
But older adults don't reach their maximum synthesis plateau until they hit around 0.4 grams of protein per kilogram.
Which is a staggering difference when you do the math.
Yeah, let's break that down. If you weigh 80 kilograms, which is about, 175 pounds?
Roughly, yeah.
A young person maximizes their muscle building with roughly 19 grams of high-quality protein.
Barely 20 grams, yeah.
But an older person requires 32 grams just to trigger the exact same biological response.
It's incredible. Aging imposes a heavy biological tax on the protein you consume.
And that brings up a really critical mechanistic question. Because if plasma amino acid levels are roughly identical between a young and older person after eating, the protein isn't just vanishing, right?
No, it's there.
It is successfully making it into the bloodstream. So why wouldn't the muscle absorb it? Are the amino acids being actively repelled at the cellular wall, or is the muscle just simply ignoring the supply?
The data points to the muscle essentially ignoring it. It is a myocellular block.
A myocellular block, meaning it's happening inside the muscle cell itself.
Exactly. The issue resides entirely within the signaling mechanisms inside the cells, specifically a complex called mTORC1.
That's the mammalian target of rapamycin complex.
Yes, mTORC1. You can think of it as the master architect of cell growth. It integrates all these various biological signals, nutrients, energy levels, stress, and it basically decides whether or not to initiate protein translation.
Calls the shots.
It does. And in younger muscle, the mere presence of amino acids in the blood is enough to wake the architect up and start construction. But in older muscle, mTORC1 becomes highly insensitive. It basically becomes hard of hearing.
Wow, hard of hearing. And the research highlights that this deafness is specifically related to one essential amino acid, which is leucine.
Yeah, leucine is unique. It's not just a passive building block for tissue. It actually acts as an active signaling molecule.
Like a key in a lock.
Right. It is the primary trigger that flips the mTORC1 switch. And studies in this review that utilized phenylalanine tracers versus leucine tracers demonstrated that older adults possess a specific isolated reduction in sensitivity to leucine.
So the normal volume of leucine that used to trigger growth in your 20s simply isn't loud enough to register with the mTORC1 pathway in your 60s.
Exactly.
The cells are deaf to the signal unless we shout at them with much higher doses of leucine-rich protein per meal.
You have to turn the volume way up.
And that is incredibly frustrating from a metabolic standpoint. It also suggests that nutrition alone is an inefficient workaround. We need a way to override that cellular deafness.
Which brings us to mechanical stress, because when we examine the data on resistance exercise, the findings take a drastic turn.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the paper reveals something that defies the standard narrative of aging.
It really does. When analyzing the post-exercise state in isolation, the evidence heavily leans toward there being no age-related anabolic resistance.
None at all.
None. Out of 8 highly specific post-exercise studies analyzed in this meta-analysis, 5 showed absolutely zero difference in muscle protein synthesis between older and younger adults.
You just have to let that sink in.
Mm-hmm.
Under the right mechanical conditions, an older muscle synthesizes protein at the exact same rate as a young muscle.
It's pretty amazing.
But how does lifting a weight chemically alter the receptivity of a cell?
It's through a process called mechanotransduction.
Mechanotransduction.
Yeah, so when you subject a muscle fiber to heavy load, you are physically pulling, stretching, and deforming the cell membrane.
You're literally warping it.
Exactly. And this physical tension triggers localized signaling cascades inside the cell that bypass some of the normal systemic hormonal pathways.
Oh, wow. So it's a completely different route.
Yes, it forcefully activates the mTORC1 complex, independent of the nutritional environment.
But the researchers note a massive caveat here, right?
Yeah.
Because you cannot just go through the motions. The dose of the mechanical stress matters immensely.
It matters more than almost anything. The review highlights a pivotal study by Kumar and his team to really illustrate this point.
Right, the Kumar study.
Yeah, so they examined a low-load resistance exercise protocol. They had participants lift at roughly 40% of their 1-rep max.
Which is pretty light.
Very light. And when older and younger adults performed a standard number of sets at this low weight, the older adults exhibited classic anabolic resistance.
So their muscle synthesis lagged far behind the younger group.
Exactly. The lightweight wasn't enough to wake up the system.
But then, Kumar's team had the older adults double the number of sets. They drastically increased the volume of the mechanical stress while keeping the weight exactly the same. And the age-related difference in muscle synthesis completely vanished.
It disappeared entirely, and this proves that the aging muscle retains its full physiological potential.
That is so empowering.
It really is. The cellular machinery, the factories, they haven't been dismantled. The capacity for robust protein synthesis is fully intact. But the muscle requires a significantly stronger contractile signal to achieve full activation.
So it's like a rusty volume knob on an old stereo receiver.
I like that, yeah.
The stereo isn't broken. It still has the capacity to blast music at level 10.
Mm-hmm.
But because the internal gears are rusted and degraded, you have to grip that knob much harder and use significantly more physical effort to turn it up compared to when the stereo was brand new.
That mechanical effort is the only way to crank the system. We know now that protein struggles to trigger the signal alone because the cells are hard of hearing.
Right.
We know mechanical tension forces the signal through, so the biological imperative becomes incredibly clear when we look at what happens when you combine the two.
We synergize the food and the movement.
Exactly. When the researchers analyzed the combined postprandial and post-exercise state, meaning participants performed resistance training and then immediately consumed protein, 7 out of 9 studies demonstrated that post-exercise muscle synthesis is largely preserved with aging.
But how does the exercise change the way the cell interacts with the protein? Like if the cell was previously ignoring the amino acids in the bloodstream, why does the physical tension suddenly make it pay attention?
It creates a really powerful sensitizing or priming effect. The mechanical loading essentially clears the communication pathways. It sensitizes the aged muscle to subsequent nutrient stimuli.
So it's paying attention again.
Right, so if you provide an older adult with high-quality protein, specifically doses over 20 to 30 grams enriched with leucine, in that window following a resistance workout, their muscle synthesis rates are restored to levels entirely comparable to young individuals.
Okay, so wait, is it fair to say that the mechanical stress from the exercise acts like a molecular key? Or rather, the mechanical stress acts as an amplifier, maybe?
An amplifier is a great way to look at it.
Right, because the leucine is the signal trying to play through the stereo. On its own, the volume is too low for the aging cell to hear. But when you apply resistance training, you turn on the amplifier, blasting that leucine signal so loudly that the stubborn mTORC1 pathway basically has no choice but to wake up and start building.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the biological reality for older adults is that maintaining tissue requires a much stronger synergistic stimulus.
You can't just casually approach it.
No, definitely not. A light jog or a small protein bar is not sufficient to cross that threshold, but robust resistance training paired with high-quality, high-leucine protein completely overrides the aging deficit. You are effectively forcing the cellular machinery to act young again.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Well, it means the narrative that muscle loss is an unstoppable, passive reality of aging is scientifically false.
Completely false. Your baseline muscle synthesis does slow down. Your cellular bricklayers get sluggish, the biological tax on your protein intake increases, but your muscles are not tearing themselves down faster. The the structural potential remains entirely intact.
The power to maintain your physical capability remains squarely within your control, provided you apply the correct biological inputs.
You cannot just coast. You need larger, concentrated doses of high-quality protein to hit that elevated leucine threshold, and you must apply sufficient mechanical volume, or intensity, to force your muscles to listen to that nutrition. You literally have to grip that rusty volume knob and purposefully crank it up.
And as we look toward the future of this research, there's one final profound concept tucked into the mechanism section of this paper that really warrants deep consideration.
Oh yeah, the inflammaging concept.
Right. The researchers briefly discuss a phenomenon known as inflammaging.
Inflammaging. It's the intersection of systemic inflammation and chronological aging, right?
Exactly, because over time, the human body tends to develop a chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation. This isn't the acute inflammation you get from, say, a sprained ankle. It is a persistent, underlying hum of immune activity.
Like a background noise.
Yes, and the paper notes that this inflammaging may directly interfere with the regulation of muscle synthesis. There appears to be a biological crosstalk between pro-inflammatory signaling pathways and the anabolic muscle-building pathways, like mTORC1.
So if we stick to our audio metaphor, that chronic inflammation is literal static on the line.
That's exactly what it is.
It's biological white noise that further obscures the leucine signal, making the cell even more deaf to the protein floating around in the bloodstream.
And that biological crosstalk introduces a fascinating therapeutic possibility. I mean, if inflammaging is a foundational root cause of this baseline anabolic resistance, it changes how we might treat sarcopenia in the future.
Wow. Yeah.
Could future medical interventions or even aggressive lifestyle changes that successfully target and quiet down systemic inflammation, could they effectively cure age-related muscle decline?
If we could administer a highly targeted therapy that suppresses that specific inflammatory static, we might theoretically drop that protein threshold back down to 0.24 grams. We could make our muscles biologically young and highly receptive to nutrients again before we ever even step foot in a gym.
That is the frontier of longevity research, clearing the static so the cellular communication can function flawlessly regardless of chronological age.
That is an incredible concept to leave you with. Imagine a future where we can just tune out the biological noise and let our internal construction crews hear perfectly again. But until we have that anti-inflammatory breakthrough, though, the science is very clear. Grab the heavy weights, eat the high leucine protein, and force those bricklayers to keep building. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.